All right, there's some handouts for you. Archbishop Vigano, who was our nuncio for a number of years, and in my judgment, probably the best we ever had, his farewell talk to the Bishops' Conference focused on Catholic education. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk. I was particularly fond of it because he took about 6 swipes at the Jesuits. And anybody that can do that deserves a lot of credit. But anyway, you may find some worthwhile material in that. And then, the Cardinal Newman Society produced a little pamphlet during the 50th anniversary of the Council. They did a teacher guide to the Vatican II Declaration on Christian Education, which you may find useful to guide your faculty through. Perhaps at the beginning of the school year, I hope you'll have a faculty retreat as well as an in-service thing. And certainly every Catholic school teacher ought to have read and assimilated the Vatican II document on Christian education. And so I think that, and then actually appended to that, there is also a series of quotes from that document I mentioned earlier in 1977, The Catholic School. I highlighted about 15 paragraphs out of it. That's on the back page. And then, 20 years after the document on the Catholic School, in 1997, the Congregation of Catholic Education produced another document called The Catholic School on the Threshold of the Third Millennium. And I highlighted certain paragraphs out of that. And then some quotations from John Paul in his letter to families in 1994, and his apostolic exhortation, Ecclesia in America, in 1999. And then about 20 canons from the codes dealing with Catholic education. And actually, I'm going to highlight some of those in a minute. But this puts some of the material at your disposal in a user-friendly format. So if you look at the section called the Canon Law Pertaining to Catholic Education, Canon 793, paragraph 1. Parents and those who take their place are bound by the obligation to possess the right of educating their offspring. Now, the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church discusses this and says parents are the primary educators, but primary implies what? Secondary. And so while they are the primary educators, they are not the only educators of their children. In 794, the duty and right of education belongs in a special way to the Church. Right? So there's an institutional aspect to this. And then the second paragraph of that canon, pastors of souls have the duty of arranging everything so that all the faithful have a Catholic education. 796, among the means to foster education, the Christian faithful are to hold schools in esteem. Schools are the principal assistants to parents in fulfilling the function of education. The next paragraph, parents must cooperate closely with the teachers and the teachers to collaborate with the parents. 798, parents are to entrust their children to those schools which provide a Catholic education. Canon 800, the Church has the right to establish and direct schools of any discipline, type, and level. The Christian faithful, that means all Christians, are to foster Catholic schools, assisting in their establishment and maintenance according to their means. The point I made earlier about it's not only the responsibility of the parents who happen to have their children in a Catholic school. 802, If schools which offer an education imbued with Christian spirit are not available, it's for the diocesan bishop to take care that they are established, right? And, there was a common policy up through even the early 60s, that when a new parish was being erected, the first building that was built was the school, right? And the church followed sometimes 10 years, 15 years later. But the idea was very, very clear. Our first responsibility is for the education of the children. 806, the diocesan bishop has the right to watch over and visit the Catholic schools in his territory, even those which members of religious institutes have founded or direct. I was told recently that in a particular diocese, the Jesuits that run a prep school there had insisted that the diocesan bishop had no authority over their school because as Jesuits, they are a, quote, exempt institute. And so it reinforced the idea that a school may well be Jesuit but not Catholic. And the diocesan bishop wrote to the Holy See and got a clarification. Yes, as a matter of fact, Father Ignatius, you are under the diocesan bishop, all right? And then 806, and this is an important point. Directors of Catholic schools are to take care, under the watchfulness of the local ordinary, that the instruction given in them is at least as academically distinguished as that in the other schools of the area. Let's remember, the noun is school. It's a school first, all right? And if we are not doing the academic job that needs to be done, we are failing those children. I mean, they can recite the 10 Commandments till the cows come home, right? And it's important that they know the 10 Commandments. But they also have to be made functional in a society. And so they need to know math and history and all these other things. And these are not accidental, right? I'm going to talk tomorrow about a spirituality of study, right? All of this is to the plus. They have to be good institutions. We have to be able to say to parents, I mean, if I were a parent, I don't care how Catholic the school is, if my kids weren't learning to read and write, I wouldn't send them there, all right? It would be doing a disservice to the kids. So sometimes, we say, oh, well, what's more important? And, Mother Angelica was fond of that dichotomy of, I don't care about the 3 letters after your name, I worry about the ST in front of it. Well, in the Catholic scheme of things, to be a saint does not exclude being a scholar, all right? And some of the greatest scholars in the history of the church also have an ST in front of their name. Okay, I think those are the documents I want to highlight at the moment. Then we want to talk about Catholic identity. And what do we mean by that? I always refer to, I say, breathing Catholic air. And what do we mean by that? You remember, I guess it was Justice Porter, that Supreme Court Justice, who said he couldn't define pornography, but he knew it when he saw it, right? And in some way, we can say that about Catholic identity of a school, right? It's not that we have a checklist and say, let's see, there are 42 characteristics. Oh, this school has 35, this one has 37, this one has 15. But it's an air about an institution. When I go into a Catholic school, the first thing that I always watch for is, what's the reaction of the children to me? If I'm walking through a corridor and kids say, hi, Father, good morning, Father. I say, Number 1, they're used to seeing a priest in the school. And number 2, they see any priest as Father, a member of the family of the church. Right? If I go into a place and there's no greeting, and it's not that I want kids to bow and scrape, that's not the point. It's an indication of their sense of family, right? And I've said to one principal said, well, just because I said, listen, I'm in Manhattan 4, 5, 6 times a month. And on the streets of Manhattan, cops, firemen, hookers, drug addicts all say, good morning, Father. And if you can't get that in a Catholic school, there's something wrong, okay? So we're talking about first of all, what's the purpose of a Catholic school? John Paul says, it's the synthesis of culture and faith and the synthesis of faith and life. So it's a holistic approach. It's not compartmentalized. All of education today has become highly compartmentalized. Secular education. So, if you're a student at Princeton and you go to the English professor and say, I would like you to tell me some more about Shakespeare's sonnets. And the English teacher says, oh, Shakespeare, that's not my field. I don't deal with Shakespeare. Professor so-and-so, he deals with Shakespeare. So he gets directed to the Shakespeare professor. Could you tell me about Shakespeare's? Oh no, I only do the tragedies. I have nothing to do with the sonnets, right? This is a very fragmented approach to education, huh? And sometimes people will say, in the pre-Vatican II era, kids came out knowing an awful lot more about the faith than they do today. And I think that's true. But why? And they say, well, they, had, longer religion classes. I said, no. We had religion 30 minutes a day when I was a kid. 30 minutes was less than all the other subjects, all right? We had Mass only once a month, first Friday of the month, all right? So it wasn't that we were in church all the time. But what happened? It was religion was taught throughout the curriculum. And so when you did history, you did the Protestant Reformation, you learned the theology about the Protestant Reformation and the counter-Catholic Reformation and so forth. So things were spread throughout. And so it was an assimilation process that took place. And so permeation of the curriculum. When Charles was superintendent in Gaylord, I went to one of their high schools, and Bishop Hebda had said to me, now, when you go, I don't want to tell you what to do, you're the professional, but I want you to go, I hope you can go and see one of the religion teachers. She's a little spitfire, and she teaches apologetics. Was that to the juniors or, yeah? And just by accident, the first classroom I walked into was this little spitfire. And the teacher was I said, no, just go on. Charles was with me. And she said, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at the book of Revelation, chapter 12, and we meet 3 characters. The woman, her son, and the dragon. Where have we seen those 3 characters before? And the kid says, junior in high school, Genesis 3:15. And she said, and we learned a big word for that. What was that called? And the kid said, proto-evangelium. And I leaned over to Charles and I said, you realize 90% of the priests of this diocese wouldn't know that answer. We walked across the hall to a science class where they had just finished a unit on genetics. And the teacher was giving out an excerpt from the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, Donum Vitae. I said, exactly. This is what ought to be happening, huh? Not in religion class, in science class. Or when we want to talk about abortion, all right, we can deal with it, obviously in religion class. We're talking about the 5th commandment. But where is it most effective? We've just finished a unit on fetology, all right? You say, because the church takes science so seriously, she says, science teaches us that is a human being. And because we take science seriously, and we take philosophy seriously, if that is a human being, then that human being must be respected and protected. So this is not an esoteric weird doctrine dreamed up by dried up celibates, all right? It's a community that takes science seriously and makes the appropriate applications. But that's done in a science class, right? Similarly, how to approach history. How can you teach literature without reference to religious and moral values, right? We've read a short story. What's going on here? What about the characters here? What about the plot development? What is all this all about, right? So it's this permeation of the curriculum. And then it's seeing the connectedness of things. So it's not this is here and that's there. No. How do these things overlap? How do they interact with each other? And then we want to also say it's an atmosphere. It's creating an atmosphere. A Catholic school needs to be a liturgical institution. We need to live the liturgy. And that doesn't simply mean when we have a school mass, right? That the liturgical seasons ought to be a part of who we are, right? We breathe these things. An introduction to the lives of the saints. Kids love heroes, right? And certainly we can't point to heroes in sports or entertainment or government, all right? But there are heroes, the saints. And I remember one of the first books I read in grammar school was called The Saints, God's Friends and Ours Too. Nice little title, third grade I think it was, all right? The Saints. And so every morning, over the PA system, the saint of the day is, and just a paragraph or two about the saint, and maybe what's a feature of this saint that we can emulate. Or the liturgical season of Advent and Lent, or major feasts, Corpus Christi, the Sacred Heart, Marian devotion. All of these things ought to be part and parcel of the education. And again, it's not something that's isolated into a 30-minute religion class. And then we can talk about certain characteristics. So yeah, there are certain qualities. And for instance, someone's teaching fourth grade math. An ambulance goes by. The teacher stops and says, boys and girls, put your pens down. Let's pray for the sick person and for the medical personnel who are going to take care of that person. Or history class, church bell tolls for a funeral. Let's stop and pray for the repose of the soul of the deceased and for the consolation of the family. I said this to a school in Miami last year, in-service program, and one of the teachers started weeping. I said, well, she said, Father, that's so beautiful. She wasn't doing it. Not that she was opposed to it. It never dawned on her, all right? But now she knows about it. And see, this is something we have to take into account. When we had women religious in good numbers in the schools, there was a built-in in-service approach to things, huh? The nuns did it for each other, and then, if you had a multi-grade school, so, 2 homerooms of second grade or 3 of second grade, so a sister was there and then a lay teacher, and they worked together. And so that was happening in a very natural way. I have no problem with Catholic schools having even a preponderance of lay faculty, but we have to give formation to these teachers, all right? And what I find, and having been in the business now for 35 or more years, some of these things, if I said this in 1975, I would get either smirks or a fight. We're not there anymore. The young Catholic school teachers today are generally loyal sons and daughters of the church, lots of goodwill, but not a lot of formation. And also, because of the absence of sisters for the most part, this is another reason why priests have to take up a lot of the slack now. And so formation of the faculty, right? So it's not simply a matter of, going to a faculty party once a year or signing the check. But we have to have ongoing formation of the teachers. And the teachers appreciate it. Also an outreach to the teachers in terms of being a spiritual father to the teachers. It's not simply that we're concerned about the welfare of the children. We are. But we need a spiritually healthy faculty as well. And if they're healthy, then the kids are going to be healthy. The artwork in a school, good religious art, not cheap junk, but good classical pieces, all right? In the classrooms, in the halls, all right? So that people see, they learn the faith through the art, but also what's happening. They're being introduced to a Catholic culture. Right? I mentioned liturgy. Please God, we're done with the strum and hum era of liturgical music, all right? All of that junk from the 60s and the 70s, there's not a single one of those pieces, thank God, that's being played anywhere today, right? Well, what is it? But we have to introduce them to the liturgical patrimony of the church, all right? So Gregorian chant, Renaissance polyphony, beautiful hymnody, these are things that are going to last. And sometimes people say, oh, you can't do that. Well, I recommend, for example, go to the website of Atonement Academy in San Antonio, all right? K-12 school, and they have about 5 choirs among the 12 grades in the school. The 8th grade gift to the graduating seniors is at the baccalaureate mass, they sing a Palestrina or bird mass, right? 8th graders doing sacred polyphony. Magnificent stuff, right? And of course, Charles is a music teacher. He can tell you, what can kids do?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking about this, but when I took over the band, I tried to figure out ways to warm up, and so we started, for instance, in November, we say our November prayers, but I also teach them about the Dies Irae and the Day of the Dead, because it's so important in Western music. The Day of Wrath isn't something we dwell on with the church right now, but it's a musical point that and so then when we get into to Advent, we'll sing Condita on Magisterium until the 17th, but we switch over to Veni Veni Emmanuel. And we can do this for each season, liturgical season, so the children know, what season they're in. And also in my school, when we would go around, sometimes there was pushback whether we say the Angelus or don't say the Angelus. But I'll tell you this much. I grew up in a military family, and when I was a little boy, we'd go on the military base. If you're on the base at noon, the national anthem would play. You were supposed to know where the flag was, and you would turn it, put your hand over your heart or sing the national anthem and stay in place. I was shocked a couple of years ago to go back to Bowman Air Force Base outside Washington, D.C., where I grew up. The base isn't run by the military anymore. It's run by conscripted private industry. There was no culture on the base anymore. I was shocked. It had been lost in just my generation. I remember walking with my father's hand, along. And I guess what I lament about that is that so quickly then my boys can watch a national football player go on his knees because he doesn't think that things are the way they should be in the United States instead of rolling up his sleeves. I guess my point is that the culture can be lost very, very quickly. And sometimes, at least in my lifetime, I've had to wrestle with this idea that, well, the kids they don't understand that word. Why are you making them say that? They don't, But if we don't pass down these things that are part of our heritage and our culture, trust me, they will understand it someday. And they're also listening to iPads and touching, doing lots of things that they don't understand that's going into their hearts and their minds that is poison and not good. So,
well, this whole idea with these, so-called children's liturgies drives me wild. All right? Now, I must confess, as a young priest, on one occasion, I used one of those ridiculous Eucharistic prayers for children. Right? I felt like a total moron. Right? Jesus, you are here, and we're happy that you're here, and we're all here together. And the next class mass, a 4th grader said, Father, you're not going to use that dumb prayer today, are you? A 4th grader knew it was stupid, all right? We don't dumb down liturgy. And people say, and some of these so-called liturgists say, well, the kids don't understand this, make it. No. When a father says, Johnny, I'm going to take you to a Yankees game, all right? The father doesn't call the manager or the coach and say, listen, my 7-year-old kid is coming for the first time. He doesn't know baseball, so no intricate plays, okay? Let's just keep this very basic. No, the kid doesn't know it all. But guess what? By osmosis, he's, oh, that's a foul ball. That's this. That. He learns by experiencing it, all right? The grammar school that I went to here in Newark was a very liturgical parish, extremely liturgical. We had a full-time music director, liturgical music director for the school, right? And by 4th grade, we had committed to memory 7 Gregorian chant masses, right? 7. What are there, 13 or 14, right? But by 4th grade. And guess what? We did know what we were saying, okay? We really did. But we were gradually being brought into a Catholic culture. And it was beautiful. It was uplifting, right? And so it's got to be a real genuine liturgical sense to the thing. I mentioned before a spirituality of study. The vocation of a child is to be a student, right? Sometimes you hear this ridiculous dichotomy in seminaries, all right? Anti-intellectual seminarians will say, well, I can't study that much, I have to be praying. Well, you're not a cloistered nun, okay? Your vocation as a seminarian is to study, and your study is a major part of your prayer. And that needs to be inculcated into children. Study is prayer, right? Because everything that we study leads us back to the source of all truth, who is God himself, right? Discipline is part of Catholic identity, discipline that is fair and consistent. That we show no partiality. So whether it's a boy or a girl, whether it's a black or a white, whether it's a rich kid or a poor kid, it's the same for everybody. And it's done fairly and it's done consistently. I had a teacher on one of my faculties. He was a nice guy and he was a good Catholic, but the kids ran roughshod over him. And it was chaos, constant chaos in his class. And he would laugh it off. And I mean, I learned more what was going on in school, not by visiting classrooms, by walking the halls. And one day, a kid comes to my office and I said, what do you want? And he said, Mr. So-and-so sent me to you. I said, for what? He said, I don't know. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said, if you don't know, we've got a problem. Because I used to make them fill out the detention slip themselves where it said reason, and which always hurt the most. And I said, because if you don't know, then it means you're stupid. If you do know but refuse to say, it means you're obtuse. And so that's a double detention, all right? Well, he just kind of, went off today. And he said, I can't take it anymore. He said, so I said to him, who's spitting in your cornflakes this morning? And he said, get out, go to the father's office, go away. And so I went to the teacher after school and I said, what happened there today? He said, Father, it's just too much. And I said, but Mike, whose fault? All right? I said, you have allowed it to get to the nth degree, and now guess what? You really can't go back. I said, they used to have that silly expression for a teacher, don't smile until Christmas, right? But there's some truth in that, because if you start out tough, you can always loosen up. If you start out loose, you can never toughen up, all right? And I said, you've had a circus in here for 3 months, right? And now all of a sudden, you're angry. And I said, and you're angry like an adolescent also. You're screaming at kids, all right? This doesn't accomplish anything. And then there's justice and there's also mercy. And so, and we have to balance that. But also, my responsibility, whether it's as a principal or a pastor, is I really, contrary to what Francis always says, I have to worry about the 99, all right? And if that one kid is constantly causing a problem and cannot be integrated into the whole thing, then we have to say the one's got to go, right? Because the one rotten apple can spoil a whole barrel. And so there is a responsibility, but it's justice and it's mercy as far as possible. High standards, academically, discipline-wise, religion-wise, all right? If you set the bar low, they'll go lower. Set the bar high, and we don't say, oh, you're evil if you don't make it. No, but let's keep trying, all right? And I always expressed amazement. You watch a coach on a football field with kids. He is demanding. It's incredible the stuff that he says and does and gets away with, all right? But in an academic setting, we say, he'll be offended, he'll be hurt, right? No, let's challenge. And again, it's got to be done in a charitable way, but high standards for everything. Keeping technology at bay. And this is an area where Catholic schools do not have to imitate what's going on in the public school down the block. But we have to be able to tell our parents, we're not imitating this. Why? Because educationally it's not sound. All right? We have all the studies now that show giving kids access to computers at an early age is damaging to their creativity and all kinds of other educational issues. It's probably even harmful for their eyesight and also for their mental development. And so, every kid having a computer. Why? No need for it whatsoever, right? Kids don't need computers to learn. I had an old lady tell me, I feel so inferior to my grandchildren. They are so much smarter than I am. And I said, oh, how are they smart? What they can do with those devices. I said, yeah, but do they know the difference between a noun and a verb? And she said, well, but they can do this. And I said, can they name the 10 Commandments? In a world religions class at this secular college, of the 15 weeks, I spent 8 on Judaism and Christianity and was roundly condemned by the dean. She said, I think that's an inordinate amount of time. I said, we live in a Judeo-Christian society. They don't know the basics, all right? And as we were approaching the New Testament, I said, who can name the 4 evangelists? You know what one kid said? Is that a new rock group? Yeah, the 4 evangelists. So, keep an attitude of hopefulness and joy. Andrew Greeley, whenever you think of his porno novels, but was a good sociologist. And he did some of the best work on sociology of Catholic schools. But he created what he called an index of hopefulness that he administered to Catholic school graduates and Catholic kids who had gone to non-Catholic schools, whether private or whatever. And there were 4 scenarii that he presented of a tragedy. And for each one, 4 possibilities. And so, I've just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so one is, oh, well, I'll just kind of grin and bear it and move on. Or, oh, well, if this is God's will, da-da-da-da. And then one of the answers for each of these tragedies was to say, this is not a good thing, but I hope that some good can come out of it. And he said that was the answer given by the majority of Catholic school graduates. It was an acknowledgement that there was a difficulty, but the expression of hope that something else could, either I would grow as a person or that some benefit would accrue in another way. And in a culture, particularly a culture of youth, where so many are prone to suicide now, this is an important thing. In in one of the high schools, of course, as you know, in the church, you get the reputation for being Father Fix-It. So you always get sent to a dump, and he'll fix it. And I don't mind fixing it, but what annoys me is after I fix it and I leave, a character comes in and lets it all go to hay again. But at any rate, in one of these places, it was a disaster place at every level, academically, religiously, discipline, and so I get a call one day, and I had to be a lion tamer. I mean, really, I was 26, 27 years old at the time, and I said, I've really got to take the bull by the horns here. And one day, a woman from one of the state universities who was getting a master's in education, she said, Father, I'd like to come and visit your school. I have to visit 4 or 5 schools and do a report. And I said, oh, geez, this is the last thing I need, is the word to get out how bad the place is. Right? And so I said, I'm new, I'm trying to feel my way. Call back in a while. I figure she'll forget about it. Well, 3 weeks later, she calls back. And I said, okay, well, if I tell her not to come, she's going to think it's really bad. But I tried to plant her in good classrooms where there were good teachers and so forth. And in between second and third period, I'm walking the corridor and I see her and she said, Father, do you know what kind of a school you have? And I thought, oh, no, it's out. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, the kids here, they're happy. They smile at each other. They greet the teachers. And I said, well, I hope so. She said, Father, that's not the case where I teach. She said, they growl at each other. They say nothing to the teachers unless they're cursing at them. And I said, isn't that interesting? It was something I just took for granted. I thought, well, this is sort of human, but you can't take that for granted. And so this element of joy that you experience, you ought to be able to feel that in a Catholic school. And then when we're talking about high standards, so not the Common Core. Monsignor was part, and I guess you were too, of that workshop I did for Catholic superintendents, 4 years ago now? And I was saying, because we're all trying to feel our way about how to relate to this Common Core demand. And stupidly, so many dioceses got on board with this without even knowing what it was all about, right? And I remember before I sponsored this workshop, and what did we have, about 25 diocesan superintendents came, but I called a number of my bishop friends who are good guys, solid bishops, and I said, well, what do you think about this Common Core? Not one bishop had ever heard of it. But they weren't unique because 99% of the population had never heard of it, all right? It was something done behind closed doors. And so I said to each bishop, I said, well, you don't know anything about it. No. I said, do you realize that your superintendent has mandated it for your schools? What? Well, that can't be. I said, it is. You're the ordinary. That person is working for you and has done something in your name, right? And these bishops were stunned. Right? So, Common Core. I always say, why do we want to imitate a failed educational system? It makes absolutely no sense to me. I had a woman at that workshop, Sandra Stotsky, a non-practicing, very secular Jew, who has spent the past 5 years running around to Catholic schools saying, don't get involved in it. Don't get involved in it. She's from Massachusetts. And she said, and she was part of the increased educational standards of Massachusetts. And I think Massachusetts, correct, is still the highest achievement in the country. And she said, the public schools of Massachusetts have the highest achievement scores. But the Catholic schools of Massachusetts are even better than the public schools of Massachusetts. Why would you want to get involved with this? Right? And we have this inferiority complex. Yeah? Oh, if they're doing it, we better do it. Well, no. If they're doing it, let's make pretty sure that we probably don't want to do it, okay? Because it's a fad, it's a gimmick, all right? Also, that let's have a return to a classical approach to education. Tomorrow at lunch, you're going to hear from a woman who turned around a school in the Washington Archdiocese, 10 years ago or so. And I'm a great believer in what I call niche marketing. What are the niches for a Catholic school? Number one, a strong Catholic identity. That can't exist anywhere else. And a classical approach to education. I guarantee you, there's not going to be a school within 50 miles of you that's doing it. And if you can market those two elements, you're going to be a grand success. In this school, in the Washington Archdiocese, I went there a number of years ago, and it's interesting because the population is about 50% reasonably affluent. Parents are professors and government workers and so forth, and about 50% below poverty. They're all in the same school. Of course, we don't know who's who. Thank God for uniforms and all the rest of it. But they start Latin in the first grade. And I went in, and they do baby Latin, but they're getting grounded in thinking outside of their own experience, all right, and learning another culture at the same time. And I walked into this first grade Latin class, and I picked up a cute little Latin book, which has some very basic grammar and a lot of conversational phrases. And so I looked at this little guy, and I said, "Quid agis?" And he said, "Bene." And I looked at another kid, and I said, "Quid agis?" He said, "Optime." And I said, "Quid agis?" He said, "Esse me." I went into a fourth grade class, social studies. They had just finished World War I and were moving into World War II. And so I said, "Tell me about World War II. What have you learned so far?" And then they knew the Axis and the Allies, and all of that stuff. Pretty good for starters, all right? 2 days into World War II. And I said, "But now, boys and girls, can you tell me about why World War II started?" Little kid, fourth grade, said, "Because they didn't end World War I right." He had already learned critical thinking skills, right? It wasn't, he knew the dates. Everybody, they ought to know the dates. They ought to know the players. But he connected the dots in fourth grade. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be fostering. I mentioned the goal that everyone, I get so tired of these mission statements for parishes, right? What's your mission statement? Get on with it, Father, will you? But I've told schools, I said, the mission statement of a Catholic school is simple, that every one of our graduates become a saint. Okay? Well, I know there's not a lot of jargon in that, but that's what it's about, okay? And in one of these problematic schools that I inherited, the first day, I had 500 kids in the bleachers, and I began by saying, this school exists for one purpose and one purpose alone, that everyone here become a saint. And this blood-curdling scream came from the bleachers. Guy yells, "I ain't no saint and I don't want to be." And I said, "Who said that?" "Center court, get down here." Struts down. And I said, "Well, we know you're not a scholar, so you better start working on the grammar, okay?" I said, "That you're not a saint, that's also clear. That you don't want to be a saint, sir, we have a problem. Right? Because if you really mean that, then I'm telling you right now, leave this gym, go to my office, do not pass go, do not collect $200, and I will write a paper transferring you to the public dump 2 blocks away." And I said, "And anyone else who doesn't want to be a saint, the procession starts right here. Follow him out the gym." Well, could have heard a pin drop. After the assembly, I find out he was the captain of the football team. I always go for the big ones first. Who ended up becoming my closest friend. I told him to atone for his behavior. "I want you to go to daily mass for 2 weeks because you think religion isn't important. Now you're going to give an example to everybody that it is important. And he became actually a leader of a spiritual revival among the students, right? So there are things that we can do. And when people talk about anti-bullying programs in schools, if you're in a government school, how can you do that? You say, well, it's not nice. Well, I think it's nice. I'm a bully, and I have a hell of a good time bullying, right? Well, it makes somebody feel bad. I don't care. But in our environment, we can say, no, that's a violation of the fifth commandment. That's a violation. And God's not happy with that. And you're not being the person God wants you to be. Dostoevsky says, without God, everything is permissible, right? And that's, of course, exactly the case in these other institutions. How can you tell a kid in a public school it's wrong to cheat? Why? What's wrong? You may remember one of the Archie Bunker episodes where he's decided to take the high school equivalency exam. And Meathead catches him making the crib notes. And Michael says to him, Archie, that's unethical. What do you mean? He said, it's dishonest. And he said, hey, you're proving you're a meathead. He said, dishonest. He said, I looked in the mirror yesterday and I said, Archie, can you pass this without cheating? And I honestly had to say, no. So I'm being honest by having the crib sheets, right? Well, of course, anything goes. And so everybody to be a saint. And a community that promotes vocations to the priesthood and the consecrated life. This ought to be as natural as could be. Every high school I ran, one of the first things I did was establish a vocation club. By invitation only, by the way, a little snob appeal. If you open the door and say anybody can come, nobody's much interested. And I said to the faculty, I said to the students, everybody here is not called to be a priest or a sister, but everybody here ought to be concerned about having priests and sisters. And we have to encourage people who have that orientation. I said, if a kid says, I want to be a lawyer, everybody says, good for you, good for you. When I was a little kid, it drove me wild when we'd have adults over, family or whatever, and somebody say, and what do you want to be when you grow up, Peter? I want to be a priest. Oh, you'll get over it, don't worry. I said, I'm not going to get over it, all right? Yeah. Now, my parents were supportive, but so many other people just said, no. In the one school, as I say, I was 14 years old when I went there. That one kid sent to the seminary, he didn't last. I was there 4 years. In 4 years, I sent 7 boys to the seminary. All 7 became priests. Now, I'm not the curé of ours, right? But we had a vocational culture in the school. And kids would come to me and say, Mark is hurt. Oh, why is Mark hurt? That you haven't invited him to join the vocation club. Oh, do you think I should? Do you think he has a vocation? Yeah, I think he does. They would point out other kids. And then I see that there's a high school in, is it Knoxville? I think it's Knoxville. That it's a boys' high school. And every year, when a graduate is entering the college seminary, the vocations director and the bishop come to the high school to accept the boy into the seminary. And they've been averaging 2 and 3 boys a year from that one school. But again, there's something in the culture that says, this is good, this is worthwhile. And we want, now I must say, when I was in high school, and it was in the crazy 60s of all things, but all of my classmates called me Father Pete. It was just, and they thought it was great. I mean, they were fornicating, half of them, but they thought it was great that one of their classmates was going to be a priest. And I think we have to make this a normal vocational choice. And vocations need to be fostered early. And the earlier, the better. Again, it's not 1950 where you could say, oh, well, he'll stay in the world for a while and then he'll go. No, the longer they're exposed to the world, the more difficult it is to settle into a religious vocation. In 1950, teenagers, for the most part, were not fornicating, they weren't involved with drugs and so forth, right? And as a priest who taught me in high school said, he said, you know, sex is like candy. Once you have a little, you always want more. and so I'm going to talk about this on Thursday, the maintenance of chastity. Right? We're not Jansenists, but there's something that's important to maintain there. And you have to be able, we have to keep kids chaste so that their focus remains on Christ. And because when they get distracted by the other stuff, even though we can make all kinds of psychological excuses about the hormones and all, and which is all true. And granted, it's harder for them to be chaste than it is for somebody who's 45. But at the same time, that's also part of the culture of the school. And okay, so we have, through our Catholic Education Foundation, an instrument that we created about 5 years ago called the Catholic Identity Assessment Instrument. And I'm going to give you copies of it. And when Charles was the superintendent in Gaylord, the 4 high schools participated in it. We just finished all of the high schools of the Los Angeles Archdiocese, but it's also for grammar schools. And what's interesting is it's an instrument that the entire faculty, administration, and staff, so the cleaning staff, the cafeteria staff, the teachers, everybody. Why? Because everybody in a Catholic school is a teacher, right? So it's not simply the classroom teacher. And one of the reasons that we went with the whole 9 yards for this was one of the priests involved with putting this together with me had been teaching in a boys' high school, good school, and good Catholic ethos to the place. But the most popular man in the school was the janitor, an old man, 70 years old. But the kids gravitated to them, and this priest said, I presumed it was because a lot of them don't have a grandpa, and he, filled that role. He said, and then I started hearing confessions. Grandpa was giving all the boys condoms after school. This pious little old man. The breakdown in the Catholic ethos in the school was not through the administration. It wasn't through the faculty. It was a janitor. Right? And so everybody has to participate. And it's a very extensive, takes about an hour. We collate the data through SurveyMonkey and then produce a report. So here's what you have said, and here's our reaction to it, and here are recommendations. In one school in the Archdiocese of Denver, a new pastor came into the place, and he was first time as a pastor and first time in a parish with a school. And he said, I would like to do this. And I said, well, what's your take on the place? And he said, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good school. He said, but there are 3 teachers that I think are Catholicism light. And he said, nothing heretical, but just a kind of low-key approach to things. And so he sat them all down. They took the survey. We did the report. And we do a pretty quick turnover with it. We do it in about 2 weeks. And so we sent the report in, and he said to the faculty in February, he said, now next month, I'll be presenting you with contracts for those that we're inviting back. And he said, after the faculty meeting, 3 teachers came up to him and said, Father, by the way, you talk about the contracts. Don't bother giving us one because we don't really want to come back. Well, why is that? Well, that survey that we took, it seems like the school's going in a direction that's a little too much for us. I said to him, well, I hope you're going to give the Catholic Education Foundation a $10,000 grant because we saved you 3 lawsuits. But notice what happened. It was a self-selecting exclusionary process. Just asking the questions automatically indicated where the school ought to be going. In one of the high schools that we looked at recently, and I've been generally very, very impressed about these reports, but in one school, we discovered there was a teacher who was an atheist, and who had told the students that he was and why he was an atheist. The administration didn't know anything about it, but it surfaced in the comments of other teachers. We have a teacher who's been doing this. And we went to the administrator and he said, my God, I never knew. And, ciao. Okay. By the way, make sure your contracts are airtight. What you're expecting of a teacher, because lawsuits multiply. But if it's an ironclad contract, you can do what you need to do. So I would, heartily recommend looking at this. We usually, depending on the size of the school, but usually it's $1,500 to do the study. And if a school can't afford it, very often we found local Knights of Columbus will sponsor it even. So it's a very handy tool. And if a school wants to do a second level of it, that involves an on-site visitation. And so I or somebody from the staff will go for 2 or 3 days and visit classrooms, interview department chairmen and teachers, parents. If it's a regional school, the board of pastors, and so forth. And then the third level is we have what we call needy areas. And so if you want a workshop for your teachers on Christian discipline, on permeation of the curriculum or whatever, we can do that kind of thing. So those are some of the items that I think are worth considering. But again, to ensure that what I call the Catholicity quotient of the school, the CQ, not the IQ. So questions, comments? Yes, sister.
Father, before you mentioned very quickly something about Francis and leaving in 99, were you talking about Pope Francis?
Yeah.
Or, what in what context?
Well, he's always talking about going to the peripheries, and
Okay.
who cares about the mainstream? Well, I care about the mainstream. Right? And also there's sort of, there's a false concept of mercy as well, okay? It's not merciful to leave people in their sin. One of the corporal works of mercy is instructing the ignorant. And, it's nice to say the door is open, anybody can come in, but part of that coming in is an invitation to conversion, huh? Cardinal O'Malley said to me the other day, he said, this is wonderful to invite people in. And he said, but at a certain point, we have to tell them they have to stop doing this if they don't want to go to hell. He said, that's also very merciful. Right? So, anything else? Yeah.
Just wondering if you are familiar with the Chesterton Academies.
Yeah, sure. It's a classical approach, and they're growing by leaps and bounds. And there's a version of them in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia called the Regina Academies. It's a classical approach, and about 5 years ago, I guess, some lay people went to Archbishop Chaput and said, would you give us permission to start one of these schools? And he said, sure, go for it. And they're up to 5 now. And interestingly, one of the diocesan high schools has now taken a component of that and made it a separate track within the diocesan high school. So the full classical approach, even at the high school level. But again, I think it's a very worthwhile thing. Very, very good. And what it really is, it's returning us to our source. This is Catholic education is classical education. It's not trendiness, right? And it's not educational slogans. When I taught my early years teaching graduate education classes at St. John's University, I taught what they called the fundamentals courses, so educational philosophy, educational psychology, and research methods, and so forth. And I would say the first day to these new master's level teachers, I'd say, now listen, if you're not a cleric or a religious, being sent here by your superior, or a public school teacher for whom there'll be an increment in salary for getting a master's degree, drop this program immediately because you're not going to learn anything here at all. And the dean would say, Father, don't say that. I said, no, I mean, because, either you're born a teacher or you're not, all right? And all of these gimmicks, they don't do anything for anybody. And that's part of the problem in public education is, we've got race to the top and leave no child left behind. And so we've got a slogan for something, but what's happening as a result of it, And so when you're getting back to the basics, literally, of a classical education, I mean, I give my students, there's a test, I think it came from Iowa in 1874 or something, the 8th grade finishing exam. 90% of doctoral students today couldn't pass that exam, right? I mean, it's in math, it's in geography, it's in history. It's about 5-6 pages. And these were for farmers. But, again, it's, the dumbest generation. But if you get them into the basics, into the classical approach to things, it changes everything. And it excites them. That's the other thing. So much of education is boring. When a kid says it's boring, often it is, all right? Because, it's the same old nonsense over and over again. And now you've got this math with the Common Core that if a kid solves a problem correctly but doesn't use the Common Core method, he's marked wrong. Conversely, a kid who gets the wrong answer but uses the method gets it right. This is absurd, huh? I mean, this is lunacy writ large. So, talk about Alice in the Looking Glass. The whole thing is all backwards. But again, I think this is where we have to say, no, we don't go there. We're different, and we're proud of the difference. And as a matter of fact, we would be happy to show you how we do it. When I was a seminarian, I was vice principal of an inner city school in Trenton, and we had a new public school opened up the block. And some of you are old enough to remember the school without walls business. And so, kids did whatever they wanted, a bucket of paint, go paint the wall, do this, do that, no structure, no grades, no grades as in ABC and no grades as in first, second, third, all this chaos. And so we find out that there's, this new school opening up a block away from us. And our principal, Franciscan sister from Philadelphia, she said, my gosh, she said, these kids have no structure at home. And now they're going into that, and there'll be no structure there whatsoever. She said, what a disaster. Well, we find out that the founding principal of the school is an ex-nun. And so she calls our principal, and she said, listen, honey, you gotta bring some faculty over to see this. This is cutting edge. This is where, this is like 1973, 74. This is where it's at, and you wanna be part of this, huh? And our nun kept saying, no, 1,000 excuses, why not? And so finally, the ex-nun calls our principal. She said, next week is Ascension Thursday. I presume, as usual, you're going to have Friday off. Bring teachers over. And so it was like Chinese water torture. So Sister Catherine said, all right. So she says to me, listen, why don't you come with me and Sister Agnes? Let's go and get this over with once and for all. And so we go in. And I must say, it was not as chaotic as I thought it might be. And we get into a math class, and Sister Agnes says, now, I know that, you don't have, 4th grade, 5th grade, but if this were a graded school, what grade would this be for the math you're doing? And the guy said, second semester, 7th grade. And Sister said, really? Oh, we do that in 4th grade. And it was similar things. And so we walked out, and that was it. That night, I'm walking in the park up the street from the parish. And there's some, little black kids out there playing. And the one said, hey, Rev, how you doing? And he said, you came to our school today, huh? And I said, oh, yeah. He said, you came with the 2 ladies with the black kerchiefs? I said, yeah. He said, you like our school? I said, oh, it was interesting, very interesting. I said, are you always that good? And he said, oh, hell no. And I said, he was 4th grade. And I said, no, why? Well, why were you so good today? He said, the principal, the ex-nun, she got on the PA system this morning. She said, the Catholics is coming. And she said, if you don't behave, I'll whoop your black behinds till they turn white. And I said, ex-nun, but still, there was the old thing was still there. But it was amazing. But there was no discipline in the place. And she had them on military guard for the day, and the rest of the thing was good. And they learned nothing. And 5 years later, the school closed. But so, as I say, the trendiness, it doesn't go anywhere.